The hospital cafeteria in November smells like overcooked soup and floor cleaner, and I have never once in my life found it comforting. But that Tuesday, I was there because I could not face going back upstairs. Not yet. My husband had been in that room for 11 days, and I needed 10 minutes where I did not have to watch the monitors or listen to the machines breathe for him. I took my tray to the corner table by the window. Outside, the parking lot was gray and wet, slush piling up along the curbs the way it does in Winnipeg when November can't decide if it wants to be winter yet. I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup and just sat there. That was all I wanted. 10 minutes of sitting. She came from nowhere, the way people do when you're not paying attention. A woman, older than me by maybe 10 years, wearing a green wool coat with a cracked button at the collar. She did not ask if she could sit. She just stood beside my table and looked at me the way a person looks at someone they recognize, except I had never seen her before in my life. She set a plain white envelope on the table in front of me. No name on it, nothing written at all. "You'll need this before you go home tonight," she said. Her voice was very quiet, not a whisper, but close. Before I could say a word, she walked away. I watched her cross the cafeteria, push through the door that leads to the main lobby, and disappear. I sat there with my hands still wrapped around my coffee and the envelope sitting on the table like it had always been there, like it was waiting for me. I should tell you a little about myself, because none of what happened next will make sense without it. My name is June. I am 63 years old. My husband, Robert, is 67. We've been married for 41 years, and we built our life the way most people do in this part of the country, slowly, carefully, one modest decision at a time. Robert drove trucks for 26 years. I worked as a school secretary for most of my adult life. We bought our house in East Kildonan in 1989, paid it off 14 years ago, and we always said that house was our one real accomplishment. Nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms, a backyard, a vegetable garden that Robert has tended every summer since before our daughter was born. Our daughter Colleen is 38. She has her father's eyes and, I used to think, his steadiness. She married a man named, I'll just call him my son-in-law, because I cannot bring myself to use his name with any warmth anymore. He grew up in Calgary. He works in finance. He has a particular way of entering a room that makes it feel like he's already calculated what everything in it is worth. Robert had his first heart attack in September. The second one came 6 weeks later, and that was the one that put him in the ICU at Health Sciences Center. The doctors told me it was serious, that recovery would take months, that there were decisions ahead about long-term care and rehabilitation. They used the word significant so many times in that first week that I started to hear it in my sleep. Colleen flew in from Toronto the day after the second heart attack. She cried at the hospital. She held her father's hand. She told me she was going to stay as long as I needed her. I was grateful. I was so grateful I did not question anything. My son-in-law came 2 days later. He brought flowers in a fruit basket and said all the right things. But that evening, when we were back at the house and Colleen had gone to bed early, he sat across from me at the kitchen table with his hands folded and said he wanted to talk about practical matters. He said he was worried about me being alone in the house if Robert needed extended care. He said the house was a lot to manage. He said property values in East Kildonan had gone up considerably, and that Robert and I should think about whether holding on to it still made sense. I remember the way the refrigerator hummed in the silence after he said that. I told him we were not selling the house. He smiled and said, of course, we were just exploring options. That night I lay awake listening to the house settle, and I told myself I had misread the conversation. He was trying to help. He was worried about me. That is what I told myself. Over the following 2 weeks, the conversation shifted. My son-in-law had taken time off work to stay and help, he said, and I will admit he was useful in certain ways. Driving me to the hospital, picking up groceries, managing the insurance phone calls that I did not have the energy for. But piece by piece, things started to feel wrong. He asked if he could look at the mortgage documents to understand our financial situation. He suggested that Robert's recovery might go better in a care facility closer to Toronto near Colleen. He brought up the house again, twice, in ways that were casual and almost apologetic. He mentioned something called a power of attorney and said it was just something to consider, given Robert's condition, that someone should have the legal ability to make decisions on our behalf. Colleen did not push the way he did, but she did not stop him either. She would look at the table when he spoke about money. She would change the subject eventually, but she never once said, "Mom, we are not doing this. I want to be honest with you. I was tired. I was scared for Robert. I was not sleeping." And there is a particular kind of manipulation that works best on tired people, the kind that comes wrapped in helpfulness, that disguises itself as concern, that makes you feel ungrateful for doubting it. I started to wonder if maybe I was being foolish, if maybe a smaller place would be easier, if maybe I was holding on to the house out of stubbornness rather than sense. I almost signed a document. He put it in front of me one evening, a prepared document granting him and Colleen shared power of attorney over our financial affairs. He said it was standard. He said it was just a precaution. He had a pen ready. I asked if I could read it first. He said, of course. I read it slowly, pretending to be thorough, while my heart was doing something terrible inside my chest. The document was not standard. It was broad. It gave them authority over real estate decisions, over accounts, over any asset valued above a certain threshold. Robert's name was on it in a way that looked almost incidental. I said I needed to sleep on it. He said that was fine, and he took the document back, and he smiled again, and I went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a very long time. That was the night before the Tuesday in the cafeteria. I had gone to the hospital the next morning, telling myself I would talk to someone. A social worker, maybe? A patient advocate. Someone who could tell me whether what was happening was normal or whether I was right to feel the way I felt, which was like a person standing at the edge of something and not sure how close to the edge they actually were. I did not talk to anyone. I sat with Robert for 3 hours, held his hand while he slept, and then I went downstairs because I needed coffee and 10 minutes of not watching the monitors. And then the woman in the green coat put an envelope on my table and walked away. I sat with it for a while before I opened it. The cafeteria filled and emptied around me. A family with a young child came and went. A man in scrubs ate a sandwich in 3 bites and disappeared. I turned the envelope over in my hands and then I opened it. Inside, there was a single folded piece of paper and a business card. The business card was for a lawyer, a woman named, I'll say my lawyer because she has since become important to me, with offices on Portage Avenue. The handwritten note on the back of the card said, "Call her. Don't sign anything first." The piece of paper was a printout, an email chain, printed out and folded 3 times to fit the envelope. The emails were between my son-in-law and a real estate agent. The first one was dated 6 days after Robert's second heart attack. In it, my son-in-law introduced himself as acting on behalf of the property owners, that was the phrase he used, property owners, and asked for a market assessment of our home. He described the property in detail: square footage, lot size, the renovated basement. He said the owners were exploring a sale in the coming months and wanted to understand current valuations. He sent that email before he even arrived in Winnipeg. The second email was longer. It discussed a potential listing timeline. It mentioned that the decision-making process might need to involve legal documentation, but that this was being handled. The real estate agent's response was enthusiastic. She referenced the market, mentioned comparable sales in the neighborhood, said she was excited to work with him. There were 4 more emails after that, each one more detailed. One of them mentioned Colleen by name. Another discussed staging the house while it was still occupied. I read the whole thing twice. The cafeteria noise went very far away. I thought about my husband upstairs, asleep, with tubes in his arm. trusting that the people who loved him were holding things together. I thought about the document on the kitchen table, and the pen already uncapped, and the smile. I thought about the vegetable garden. Robert planted garlic every October without fail. He had planted it 6 weeks before the heart attack. It was still out there under the November slush, waiting for spring. I picked up my phone and called the number on the card. The lawyer answered herself. I do not know what I expected, but she was very calm and very direct, and she said, "Tell me what's happening." So I did. Standing in the hospital corridor outside the cafeterias, speaking quietly with one hand over my mouth so my voice would not shake, I told her everything. The document, the emails, the power of attorney, the house. She told me not to sign anything. She said she could see me the next morning first thing. She said that what I was describing had a name. She called it financial elder abuse, and that it was more common than I knew, and that I had rights, and that nothing had been signed yet, which meant we still had room to work. I drove home that evening with the envelope in my coat pocket and my hands very steady on the wheel. Strange how calm I felt. The fear had not gone, but something had shifted underneath it. Some small piece of solid ground had appeared, and I was standing on it. When I came into the house, my son-in-law was at the kitchen table with his laptop opened. He looked up and smiled his particular smile. He asked how Robert was doing. I said Robert was the same. He asked if I had thought any more about the document. I said I had, and that I would have an answer for him tomorrow. He seemed satisfied with that. He went back to his laptop. I went upstairs, locked my bedroom door for the first time since I could remember, and I sat with my back against the headboard and looked at the ceiling and thought about the woman in the green coat. I did not know her. I still do not. I have no idea how she knew what was happening, or why she chose to help me, or how she got the emails. I have asked myself this question many times since. The only thing I know is that she saw something. Maybe she saw me sitting in the corner by the window looking like a woman who was about to be walked off a cliff, and she did something about it. She put the only thing I needed in front of me, and then she left without asking for anything in return. I have not been able to find her. I have gone back to that cafeteria more times than I can count. I have asked the staff. Nobody seems to know a woman in a green coat with a cracked button. Maybe she worked there. Maybe she had her own reasons. I stopped trying to explain it and started trying to just be grateful. The lawyer meeting the next morning was the beginning of a very hard few weeks. The lawyer reviewed the power of attorney document, which I had photographed on my phone without telling anyone. She explained the specific clauses that were designed to give authority over real property, our house, under the language of managing our financial affairs during a period of medical incapacity. She said it was carefully written. She said whoever drafted it knew what they were doing. She also told me about my options under Manitoba's The Vulnerable Persons Living with a Mental Disability Act, and about elder financial abuse protections, and about the fact that a power of attorney can only be valid if the person signing it does so of their own free will with full understanding of its contents, and that evidence of pressure or manipulation could challenge it legally even after the fact, if it came to that, but it was not going to come to that. Because Colleen came to see me. She came alone. She knocked on my bedroom door the night before I was supposed to give my answer about the document, and she came in and sat at the foot of my bed, and she did not look at me for a long time. She had been crying before she came upstairs. I could see it in her face. She said, "Mom, I need to tell you something." I sat and listened. She told me that her husband had been talking about the house since before the heart attack. Not just talking, planning. She said he had been dealing with significant losses in some investments that I knew nothing about, debts that she had not fully understood until recently. She said she had not known about the emails to the real estate agent. She said when she found out, something in her had gone very still. She said she was sorry. She said it several times. She was shaking. I did not say anything for a while. I looked at my daughter, this woman with her father's eyes, sitting at the foot of my bed with her hands twisted together in her lap, and I thought about all the years between when she was born and now. The drives to school, the lunches packed, the things you do for a child that you never once think of as a debt because love is not a ledger. Then I told her about the envelope. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she put her face in her hands. The next morning, I called my lawyer and told her about Colleen's disclosure. Then I went downstairs and I sat across from my son-in-law at the kitchen table, and I told him that I would not be signing the document. I told him that I had spoken with a lawyer and that I was aware of the correspondence with the real estate agent and that I would appreciate it if he made arrangements to return to Toronto. He did not smile this time. He tried several approaches in the next 20 minutes. Confusion, then injury, then a kind of cold reasonableness that was worse than both. He said I was being paranoid. He said he had only been trying to help. He said Colleen would be upset. I said Colleen and I had already spoken. That was when he stopped talking. He left that afternoon. Colleen stayed for another week. We did not fix everything in that week. You do not fix 40 years of mother-daughter complications in a week, and there were things between us that were going to take time. But we talked, really talked, about the marriage, about the money problems she had been trying to hide, about how slowly and invisibly she had started going along with things she knew were wrong because it was easier than the alternative. She did not make excuses for herself. I gave her credit for that. Robert came home from the hospital in January, 8 weeks after the second heart attack. He walked through the door and stood in the hallway for a moment and just looked at the house. Then he went to the kitchen window and looked at the backyard, at the garden buried under 4 inches of snow, and he said, "The garlic's going to be late this year." That made me laugh, the first real laugh in months. I told him everything, eventually. Not right away. He needed to recover, and I needed to find the right time. But when I told him, he sat at the kitchen table with his hands flat on the wood, and he listened to all of it. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Good thing you got a lawyer." "Yes," I said, "good thing." Colleen and her husband are separated now. She is still in Toronto. She calls twice a week. We are careful with each other in a way we were not before, which sounds like a loss, but actually feels like something more honest. We say things we mean. We do not fill the air just to fill it. My son-in-law made no further contact after leaving. My lawyer sent a formal letter making clear that any further approach regarding the property or financial affairs would be met with legal action. We have not heard from him since. Robert planted his garlic in October, right on schedule, the first fall after everything. I stood at the kitchen window and watched him out there in his old plaid coat, pressing each clove into the ground with his thumb, and I thought about the woman in the green coat. I want to say something to anyone who is reading this and recognizing pieces of their own life in what I have described, because I know there are people in situations like mine who have already signed the document, or who are being worn down by someone they trusted, or who are too tired and too scared to do anything but wait and see. I know because I almost became one of them. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Not because you are paranoid, not because you are ungrateful or difficult or foolish, but because your gut is often the last honest thing you have when the people around you are managing their version of events very carefully. There are people who will help you. Lawyers who work with elders, social workers in hospitals who have seen exactly what you are going through, the Seniors Abuse and Information Line in British Columbia, the Elder Abuse Ontario Helpline, the Manitoba Seniors and Persons with Disabilities Line. These services exist, they are free, and they will not judge you for calling. And sometimes, though I know this sounds like the kind of thing that only happens in stories, sometimes a stranger in a green wool coat sets an envelope on your table and says, "You'll need this before you go home tonight." I needed it. I still carry the gratitude of it. The garlic came up in June, 6 weeks late, but very green, pushing straight up through the soil like it had always known it would. When Robert pressed that first clove of garlic back into the ground, I stood at the kitchen window and thought about cause and effect, not in any grand or mystical sense, just the plain, honest version of it, that what people do catches up with them, and what you choose to do in the hardest moment tends to determine what you get to keep. My son-in-law made his calculations before he even boarded the plane. He looked at a sick man, an exhausted woman, a house with a paid-off mortgage, and he saw an opportunity. He was not stupid. He was, in fact, quite careful. But there is a particular kind of blindness that comes with that sort of thinking, the kind that cannot imagine the person it is targeting has any resources left. He did not account for a stranger in a green coat. He did not account for Colleen finally choosing honesty over the easier thing. And he did not account for the fact that tired does not mean finished. I think about that a lot. How close I came to signing, how the pen was already uncapped. There was a version of that evening where I was too worn down to ask to read it first. And I have had to sit with that version too. Not to frighten myself, but to stay honest about how these things actually work. The pressure does not announce itself. It comes wrapped in concern, in practicality, in the language of helping. And it works best on people who are already carrying more than they should have to carry alone. What I know now is that holding your ground when you are frightened and exhausted is not stubbornness. It is a kind of integrity. The kind that asks you to stay true to what you know is right, even when every part of you is tired of fighting for it. I asked to read the document. That one small act of clarity, that refusal to let fatigue make the decision for me, was the thing that kept everything else possible. And Colleen. I have thought a great deal about what it took for her to knock on my door that night. She had been going along with something she knew was wrong, and that costs a person, not all at once, but slowly, in the way that compromising yourself always does. When she finally chose to tell the truth, it was not easy, and it was not clean, and there was no guarantee it would go well for her. That took something real. I do not think she gets enough credit for that moment, even now. What this whole thing taught me is that intelligence without conscience eventually turns on the people around it, and that conscience without the courage to act on it is not much protection either. The woman in the green coated both. She saw something wrong. She figured out what to do about it, and she did it quietly and without asking for recognition. I want to be more like that. I think most of us do. Robert's garlic came up in June, green and steady and exactly on time, despite everything. That felt right.